Welcome to the Berea Podcast. This is Troy.
This is Della.
Here we are at the first of the year, and sometimes it's good to look back on where we came from. We've done several episodes of the Berea Podcast, pulling from the digital archives up at the Berea College Library. Thought we would look at that again. We found an episode from 2001 when apparently Dr. Jackie Burnside had her class do oral histories of the civil rights movement in Berea. This is an interview of Pat Brunner. So we're going to play it. We've added it a little bit for time, but here we go from the beginning.
January 24th, 2001, and we're here at Berea Baptist Church, interviewing Pat Brunner. And, okay, Julie, you want to start out?
You can start.
Okay. Okay, Pat, what exactly do you do?
I'm a retired campus minister for Baptist Student Union. Mm-hmm. Now I mostly work in the church library and a little counseling on the side.
Okay.
When it comes to me, I don't go to it anymore.
All right. Where were you born?
Tryon, T-R-Y-O-N, North Carolina, right in the edge. I'm a mountain person. Was raised in Buncombe in Transylvania County.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Came to Berea in 1952.
What did you come to Berea to do? Student?
Get out of a bar. As a student, it was I wanted to see the world. I'd never traveled. We were a farm family. We never had a vacation. And everybody I could see from my house was a relative. And I just needed a broader world. And I was bored silly in high school. Mm-hmm. You know, there was no challenge there except in chemistry and science. Everything else was I just used my wits to get out of class, mm-hmm. and do things like that. So it was good to get to Berea and get out. And of course, now I can't wait to get back to the mountains. But at that point, I needed to get away. And it was wonderful. And the first thing that happened, I met a friend who became my roommate and remains my good friend. Mm-hmm. And her roommate was this Connie Willard. Connie, what's her last name? Wilson now. And she was such a wonderful person. And it was, and then we began to see how integration didn't work. Mm-hmm. And, through her eyes, because it first became a friend and then it became a cause. And so Connie was, and a boy from Ghana, Manu, and several people became my friends. And so that's how we began to, running together, we began to see the injustices of a lot of things going on.
Well, I wanted to ask you something. When you said that you really saw what was wrong and how integration wasn't working like it should here, what were some of the things you saw?
In the first place, where Berea Coffee and Tea is mm-hmm. now, was Portermore drugstore, and there were about 5 or 6 booths back there. It was one of the hangouts, and we would go in there for coffee or anything. It wasn't encouraged by the college because they did not serve blacks, and they would hand out ice cream or coffee out the door and could be served on the street, but they couldn't come in and sit down. Well, this didn't suit us too well. And so, and this is where, then that next year after I came, this Ann Collins now came, and she was from Richmond. But let me go back. Then when this happened with Portermore, mm-hmm. Other places accepted blacks and fed them and let them come in and sit down, but not Portermore. And so there was a real rallying around and a boycott, and we wore buttons, and we all signed pledges, not all, but a good part of the student body, signing pledges that we would never eat or patronize a place that would not take our black friends. Now, this had some problems because when this Yalmanu that was a friend of ours, and we would be driving home to North Carolina, we would take him as far as a place in Tennessee. And it was really hard on the bladder because there was no place that had integrated their bathrooms, And in fact, there was a place in Del Rio, Tennessee. We had to wait in Knoxville. This is on the bus now. But in Del Rio, Tennessee was a rest stop. And you had to go down, and the black restroom was here, and on down the steps. No, the white one was the better one here, and the black one was down here. But the black one was cleaner because the percentage of blacks using it was so much smaller. And so my friend and I decided it was a long line for the white one, so we just went in the black one. I mean, it was logical, And I'll never forget these two little old ladies that were waiting in line and saw us go in and come out. She shook her head and she says, "They sure don't look black to me. Look at that red hair." So anyway, so that we contracted together for this boycott. Well, when the boycott finally got to the man at Porter Moore, he would let them come in, but then he sabotaged the waitresses would sabotage their food, like pour salt into coffee and then serve it. Now this is what Ann can tell you about, and Connie. But there was that kind of very reluctant kind of doing that. But the big hoopla that I was most involved with was with this church in 1950. I guess it wasn't. Wasn't that when the day law was repealed? Repealed.
Like 54.
No, it was earlier than that.
It was
like 1904 to 1950.
Yeah.
Okay.
And let me back up. From a sociological point of view, the college was ready, but the community wasn't.
Right.
And so there was a lot of hostility in the community. And so one thing the college did was try to protect and say, well, go to chapel, don't go to the Baptist church or these churches, which sort of took us, would have if I'd obeyed it, taken us out of being in the fray here.
Right.
And so, anyway, Adi was from Nigeria, Adi Adaramu, and I don't know how to spell that last name, but I can get the spelling if you need it.
Okay.
And he was transferred here from Fisk University. He was from Nigeria, and he was sent here by a lady who was a missionary there and said, go to Berea. His money was running out at Fisk. And wrote the church and said, this prince is coming. He had all the tribal marks on his face, and very elegant young man. I mean, wasn't trashy or pushy or anything, but just had that kind of attitude.
A way about how he carried himself.
Yeah. And I think that offended some people, because how can a black come in here and act like they're one of us, kind of thing. And so, and he became the roommate of a friend of mine who are still friends of mine. And if you wanted further, I could give you names on the whole Adi story. But anyway, Adi tried to join the church here. I mean, he just thought he would be welcome. Our mission money went to help him, get over here. And he was refused. Well, Adi kept coming with Don. Don was a minister, or became a minister. Anyway, but then in 53, when Ann Walker came, by that time, we were beginning to see that something really needed to be done. She came down and moved her membership. Now, see, this is an American black, not a Nigerian. And so she was, it's pretty routine, on a Sunday morning, she came down and was accepted into membership. Then what began? It all hit the fan. And the deacons had a meeting on that Wednesday night, an all-night meeting. And there's only one deacon left alive that was in that meeting. He won't talk much about it. I've tried. And anyway, they put out this survey, of which I have a copy for each of you. Now this, I was looking for the original somewhere. And you can read that later and see how the statistics, but the way that this is unbelievable, the way this is set up. But it's interesting. But they never did turn in the results of this vote because, for the most part, the church was a loving church. Now, then, I think through all of this, I had to learn, and some of us had to learn, it was a hard lesson to learn, about there's one thing to have the right, to be supportive of the right principles, but the agonizing part is what is the best method to bring about what you want to bring about. So, then they voted. The deacons voted to accept, to seat, and I've got these somewhere in the minutes, to seat blacks, but they weren't eligible, and they could sing solos. They could do music, get up there and dance. But they weren't allowed into membership. Now, thank the Lord this changed. I'll give you the history on that. And so I was furious. I tried to talk to the pastor because he was not taking it. He says, I have to be pastor of the whole church, people on both sides. But, first place, he had not prepared the church for this to happen. Right. It was inevitable this was going to happen.
Exactly.
And anyway, he didn't want to make people mad and so forth and so on. So I went in and had to talk with him in his office. And this was where I said some pretty strong things to him. And then he said that, there's just nothing he could do about it, And I got to the door and I looked back at him and I said, Brother Milam, and I don't know where this came from. Somebody stuck this in my mouth. Wasn't me. Yeah. Yeah, right. I said, you are so narrow-minded that a mosquito could stand on your nose and kick you in both eyes at the same time. And I slammed the door. After I slammed the door. We didn't have real good relationships after that. Say not. Although I did with his wife. Really? Now, she was really, in fact, she told me later that he asked her to stay home that night on one of these business meetings because she would influence the vote.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, she would. Anyway, so there were about 12 of us students involved with this, and I've kept up with most of them. And we really struggled. I struggled for 2 weeks on what to do. Whether some decided to move their membership to Union Church. 2, 3 went to Union Church that I can think of. The others really dropped out of church altogether, and there were 2 or 3 of us that decided to stay. But I was in old Curtis' house. Gwen was my roommate, and having my devotions and praying and fussing and cussing at the Lord, and just that kind of agonizing kind of thing. What am I to do? I don't want to be. And then we were looked down on campus if we stayed at Berea Baptist. Right. You see. But I remember Gwen came in the door, and she was a sweet thing, and she didn't cuss, still doesn't, or anything. And she came in, and I said, I've made my decision. And she said, well, what is it? And I said, I will not let those, I had an adjective to it, run me off. I'm going to stay and be a thorn in their flesh till this changes. Yes. And so Gwen and I did. And talking about method, The direct confrontation method wasn't working, mainly because we were so hot-headed and we were so right and everybody else was so wrong. So anyway, a student came here named Sandra Hill. She's still around, and she's eventually went into social work with Baptist. But anyway, she became real good friends. I had young children then, and she loved my children. And we took her. I decided I'm not going anywhere at church that she doesn't go. WMU Circle, everywhere. Now, she did not have a chip on her shoulder. She never pushed anything. But the time she was a senior and she was singing in the choir, and people they loved her dearly. And when she moved her membership as a senior, there was nothing. It was okay. Mm-hmm. By that time, it got to be acceptable. And then there was another young man that came named Howard Johnson, literally. Big, black, handsome young man. And he just had the personality that won people over without the hostile, you have to accept me attitude. And so that's sort of how the barrier was broken as they got to know individuals rather than the masses.
So these two are really the first that were able to become members of the church, not just come and hang out in the church.
As I remember, Sandra was the first.
Okay.
And then, as pastors changed and, things began to change, and then we're the outcast church among Baptists now. We've got women deacons. We have divorced people on the deacon board. I was the first woman deacon. And, just all kinds of things that are out of step with...
Y'all just don't fit.
Thank the Lord. There's some places I don't want to fit.
That's right.
Okay, so Audie, let me finish up on Audie because I wanted the record on this. He and Don became roommates, and Don and Gwen went through this, and we, of course, went through it with Audie. And Audie went... Well, I went to a state BSU convention when I was a junior, and I got up and pleaded for money to help Audie with his first year of medical school. He was quite a bright young man, and we collected $500. This was in the 50s.
That's a lot of money.
And he went on to medical school, but now he was bright and he knew his Bible and he knew a lot of things, and he got on the $64,000 question program.
Really?
And we watched it. Very few of us had televisions then. I don't even know that there was one on campus. But we went to somebody's home that had this little black and white TV. We watched Audie. And he was getting up towards the top when the scandal broke. That they were feeding. Do you know about the scandal? They'd been feeding them answers, and they had picked people. There was a movie made about it recently. Yeah. And anyway, he was caught, and they started. And it was a big news thing, and he was investigated. Found out he'd married a girl here, and then he had a wife at home.
Oh.
So he went home in disgrace. Bless his heart. Well, the good part of this is that Don and Gwen became missionaries 35 years in Nigeria, and looked and looked and looked, and finally found Audie way inland, teaching in a teaching school in a real backward place, just a humble servant. And anyway, he has since died. But anyway, they felt this call to Nigeria, partly because of Audie and his treatment here. But anyway, that's a side story. Let's see, whatever happened to Connie is a very distinguished sociologist at Brandeis, and was honored a couple of years ago. Came back here for the summer and read papers and stuff. And we had fun remembering.
It's always fun to remember.
Yeah, and then Ann Walker became a PhD in oral interpreting. If you listen to her on the phone, it's a beautiful voice. And I think she's retiring or near retiring. And when I talked to her and asked her about some of these things when I was wanting, I asked her if she would put some of this on tape for me, just to put somewhere in the archives, because this was a sort of a critical time. You see, the integration issue hit Berea 10 years before the 60s, when it was really popular. We're always out of step. This time we were ahead of step. But let's see, any more questions about the 50s?
Did you have any experiences around here or back home with Jim Crow laws?
Like what? Not at home, I didn't.
Yeah. Well, here you already said something about the Portermore, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Anything other than, like, here in town, because you've already stated that the college was a little different.
Yeah. And I think you can look back in the records, but they didn't bring a whole bunch of blacks in at once.
Right.
It's not like it is now. Mm-hmm. And it really took some very strong people to be those first blacks. Mm-hmm. They had to be able to walking on the street between here and the college, people would come by and yell at us if we were with somebody black. And but the Jim Crow, well, you see, the college students were supposed to go to the hangout. Mm-hmm. Literally, there at the parking lot behind Boone Tavern and between Boone Tavern and Anna Smith. Mm-hmm. And there was a big stalk thing up and a thing like this and a hangman's noose hanging down.
Oh, really?
and that was where the students were encouraged to go rather than the town places. And then the Carlton was sort of the fun. It's where it's where Appalachian Fireside Gallery is now, and it was sort of a shady place, the college thought, and sometimes they'd tell us not to go there. Of course, that all made it even more enticing.
Right.
And who's going to do that? And then Little Mama's around right where the Blue Tail Fly is, and they were very accepting of anybody, you know. So we had places we could go, and it was just because of the good-heartedness of the people there and like our money. But other places like Portermore, where there was just a real prejudice by the owner, was the only real Jim Crow one on that end of town. I didn't have a lot of. We were all walking, so we didn't.
You didn't go that far.
I didn't explore much. Okay, did you have another one before I go on to something else?
Were you seeing anything in the media about the civil rights or anything similar?
That didn't come up as much except till the 60s. I think you could go back and check newspapers, but Richmond really looked down on us. They always did. That Richmond's another story. Yeah. And so I'm sure the way they reported it was within their general outlook on blacks even to this day. I was at the pool two years ago, year before last. Jackie and I go to the pool together. Or sing at the pool together. But anyway, two little stories. One is there were several blacks there swimming that I didn't know, and so I got to know them and asked them where they're from. They're from Richmond, and I said, "Well, why do you come on over all the way over here to swim?" And they could swim at the Y or at Arlington, but Arlington is sort of an upper class, club for the university. And I thought it was a very telling answer that this girl gave me. And she says, "We swim over here because we feel comfortable here."
Really?
Yeah. That was just 2 years ago.
That's crazy.
And then my granddaughters have two friends that are, they're adopted. Frank and Judy Hudson. I don't know whether Judy's has been a social worker. But anyway, they're the age of two of my grandchildren and good friends. And this was when my youngest granddaughter, who says absolutely what she thinks when she thinks it, and in a loud voice.
Yes.
And somebody was saying something about her two friends, about something crude about them being black. Wendy went over and said, "They're luckier than you are," she says. Took and pulled a little piece of their bathing suit down and says, "They're black all over," and said, "You have to work at getting a tan."
Yes. I love it.
We laughed.
Oh, that is so funny.
So, and I always, my husband and I made it a point that to have many people of different nationalities in our home for our children. And we also had a principle that, because I had never traveled, that just wasn't done and wasn't available to us where I grew up. And so to have each of our children abroad before they were 12 years old.
That'll work.
Well, yeah, because then the price changed on the planes. Oops. No, actually, that's before boys hit and other things. But also, it gave them a perspective on a wider perspective on history and things before they got to high school. And so, one girl that was 13, but one summer, my oldest daughter, Charm, stayed in Europe all summer with my brother who lived there in Switzerland, suffering. And then one spent a good part of the summer in Guatemala because we had exchange students, and we'd had one from Guatemala. And where did Carabeth go? Oh, she went with us. We camped 2 or 3 weeks in England, Scotland, and Wales. And then later, one short term, when she went to Berea, I said, "You've got to get out of Berea." She came home. She says, "I'm going out of Berea for a short term." I said, "Where are you going?" "Russia." "Russia in the winter?" Yes, she went. And then she's traveled to Turkey and other places too. So I felt that a lot of this does come out with giving another generation a broader view of the world. And I think that helps their perspective in that they have made they don't have to overcome things to make friends here locally then. So where did I get off on that? You asked me about Jim Crow. I haven't met Jim Crow. I hear isn't there a whiskey named Jim Crow?
That's Jim Beam.
Oh, darn it.
You were this close.
I was that close.
Yeah.
Just can't spell. Okay.
So do you see the college as a catalyst for a lot of the change that occurred in the area?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think one of the ways that they did it, not only by bringing blacks here for us who were so limited in our outlook when we got here, but doing things in the community. Several in the BSU went out and taught Sunday school in different communities, and we would take our black friends with us, just community service. Then, for instance, more recently, like SFA, bringing the children in and doing things with them, and Upward Bound, and those kinds of things, where the word was out in a gentle way that, hey, we can serve and we can help in the community and do things in the community. So I think that, as much as anything, is having students go out and work in the communities. I worked with a group. I live in James Hall, so I must have been a freshman. Out of Union Church, where we went in when the schools were segregated, out there where they're putting the new children's Boys and Girls Club. That's coming in just beyond community school. Before you get to the interstate.
Yeah.
I worked in that school, and I worked in the Bobtown school. These were one-room schools.
Right.
The one out at Middletown was black, and the one at Bobtown was white. But we did enrichment things with them. I loved it. Of course, I was going to be a teacher. Anyway, I did teach a while. But we did enrichment things, and so that gave us a vision of of the sloppy way that black schools were,
Right.
underfunded and stuff, and we took art materials and crayons and all kinds of things. And so I think and there were a lot of, I guess 8 or 10 students that did that in some of the schools before they were ever integrated or consolidated. So, and each generation has to figure out what's needed. I wish I could go back to high school now. All the stuff they're learning, I did learn that stuff. I mean, my second grader shows me how to turn on the computer.
That's right.
So, now, was that a question that I answered, or did I just run around it?
I think you did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Try another one. Hit me.
Oh, well, I'm thinking. Let me look. I don't know. I think you've answered a lot of these questions. Do you have anything particular, do you have anything you want to talk about? Make sure we include in particular.
Well, you need to prod my mind.
Okay, let me see. Why don't you give us a little quick spiel about what Dean Allen did in the marches?
I don't remember specifically, but I do remember that when she died, her funeral service was at the Black Church, First Baptist Middletown.
Really?
Because she'd worked so much in that. And one of the people that spoke said, Dean Allen was the burr under the saddle of society. The burr under a horse's saddle.
Yeah, I've ridden horses.
The burr under the saddle. Another thing that happened, and I was just peripheral to this, but in the 60s, somewhere in the 60s, the black students took over the president's office.
Really?
And
Is that where they sat in at Lincoln Hall?
Yeah, sit in. Did you not? You didn't have anything on that?
No. Yeah. Tell us about the sit-in.
I don't know what the issue was that time. But write this down. Call Gloria Van Winkle and Ruth Butwell.
Ruth Butwell? I go to church with her.
Well, talk to her. Because...
Well, Loretta knows better than I do.
Oh, she'll talk. She'll tell you about it. No problem.
Yeah, I figured.
No problem. And so, of course, it made all the news and the TV and everything. And so... What Gloria and Ruth and some of them did, I made sandwiches and gave them. They went up there and sat in with them, took them radios and tapes and fed them all night. And there was a peaceful end to it.
That's right.
No files were destroyed or anything. But I asked them about that because the news media was really wanting something to happen. Because a peaceful end doesn't make the news the next morning.
Right.
At one time, there was a real serious issue, and this was with President Weatherford. I think this was when Weatherford was here. What's it called? Oh yeah, I know. The blacks organized. Now you could see how this movement evolved once they got power, which they needed power. But they needed power for the right reasons. They wanted an all-black dormitory. And the president said no. Says, if we have tried hard to integrate you, you should, he said, no, that's not the Berea way. So that went by. I mean, there was discussion and a lot of verbal kind of battling, but it finally died out, and they didn't get a all-black dorm.
So this was in the later part of the movement, right?
Yeah.
Like in the mid to late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ruth can tell you about that.
All right. I'll try and get a hold of her somehow. Well, I think that's good, unless you have something else.
Well, one of the things I realized in working with students through BSU, of course, going to all these state meetings, and we were always different. And one time, these wonderful kids from Grenada And Rook King, Jeremiah, and Debbie, who was my secretary, and since a couple more. But anyway, I never thought about. They would ask me how many blacks you have in your program, and I just never counted because I didn't think of people in terms of being black and white. After you work with students, that's not something that you count.
Right.
And so we were at a big PSU convention, and they had all of the listing down for the summer mission positions. And in the summer, 3 pages of them. And every one of them except one said a white student, under
Really?
qualifications. Well, I had the 4 or 5 blacks with me. I was furious. I about blew a fuse. And so we got together. We went to the campus ministry place in EKU. This was in Richmond. And we vented and blew off steam. And then finally we decided, what would we do about this? And so we got clipboards and wrote and sent around sort of secretly each aisle of, there were probably 300-400 students there from all over the state. Sent a clipboard of objections to the wording, and it was signed. How many pages of signatures we had, and asked that they be more sensitive in the way they write up things. And then I wrote a horribly mean letter. I enjoyed it so much. And I said, when you say white students, eliminate Hispanics, how white do they have to be, to be considered for this position? And I said, and I know there are some positions where a black student is more needed. I mean, there were some, and where if it's requested, and sometimes that's very wise. We had a position in inner city Washington that it would have been dangerous to send a white student into it. So but to put all of them there. And I said, and we said that at least from Berea, we would not consider anyone for a position where it said white only. And then, I asked, we've got second generation, all kinds. This is a very diverse country, but to put white in there infuriated me. And I said, by the way, most places I know are, let's see, how do they phrase that? The college, that they're inclusive and race is not an issue. There's a phrase for that.
All people are created of one blood.
No, it's the one that equal opportunity employed. And at the bottom, while I was on a roll, I decided when I wrote that, we sent all of these petitions to the home mission board. To the mission board, and I said, by the way, I think at best I can read the Bible. God is an equal opportunity employer.
I love it.
And I think the board should be
marvelous.
Equally sensitive.
That is wonderful.
That's the way I ended the letter.
That is wonderful.
Oh, I got a couple of letters of apology. One that was just a misreading of that. I've got all that. I guess Wendy's got it in the file over there. But that after that, boy, when the next year they were much more careful.
I'd say so. I think I'd be too if I got a nasty letter.
I'm surprised I didn't get fired. But anyway, because my boss should have seen that, that's in charge of this, and should have deleted that.
Yeah.
Or made done something.
A little more tactful.
Yeah, stupid. It was stupid.
Yeah, but it was needed.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that particular one, I've got a T-shirt that we sold several of them. We made up a T-shirt that says, "I refuse to have a battle of wits with an unarmed person."
Yeah.
So some issues, people don't have the brain power to deal with, or the moral standings, and I'm just not going to tangle with them. But so, what else? Well, when we were at an international conference, I had 2 teams, one that went to Botswana and one that went to South Africa. No, one went to, Botswana. I trained the 2 teams to work for the summer. And then Wendy and I went over to Zimbabwe. They came back to this big international meeting in Zimbabwe. And there at that meeting, we were in small cluster groups. And I was with a pastor. This doesn't have a lot to do. This is my personal journey here. But I met a pastor in an Indian church in South Africa. And they've been sort of lost in because the black-white issue and the reconciliation thing has been between more blacks and whites. And so they've sort of fallen through the cracks and are still prejudiced. Well, there's still a lot of prejudice. You don't change in a generation. It's a wonderful, Nelson Mandela's autobiography is wonderful. And it's on tape if you can get it up here at the library. I was very inspired by it. But those students, one of them was from Berea, but the others from all over the state, serving a summer and coming back. In fact, the reason Wendy and I went to Zimbabwe to meet them, we went early to see Victoria Falls and go on a safari, but that was our fun. Was to debrief them because it was so, not the Botswana team. It was a different attitude, but the ones from South Africa, they just came back. Just they had to be debriefed. It was such a heavy, expanding experience, and so I think that is another one. See, now here I'm projecting into the future, but I have this philosophy that a student isn't completely educated until they've been out of their own country a while. Because you get not only what it does for expanding your awareness of world citizenship, but it helps you understand your own culture when you come back. You don't know your culture when you get out and compare it to somebody else's. And we were the first ones when President Weatherford was here to send a team abroad for short term to Israel. He sent one every other year. Now Wendy's sending them to Bolivia because Israel's not has some problems. And then Dorothy Trudenick, they argued up and down. Says you can't send students over there without supervision, this, that, and the other. I said, wait a minute. I'm talking about young adults. I'm screening them. I'm not going to send them if they're not mature enough to handle this. And made my case with President Weatherford. And then Dorothy Trudenick got to go with a team to study art in Greece. And so that's how the short-term abroad got going. Really? And they finally found out. Students can do. They're young. I keep saying they're young adults. They're young adults. You're talking to me like they're kids.
That's pretty funny.
Of course, some are, but I wouldn't select those that are still kids to go.
No.
And I think, I would hope other people would have the same wisdom.
Yep. Well, I think that's about it. I think you've given us a lot of good information. And thank you. We'll try and get you a copy of this tape if you'd like one.
I wonder what I said. Who said that?
It was your voice. It was the bird right there in the corner.
Yeah, somebody ventriloquist. You can turn that off and I'll tell you one more story.
And that's the way that it ended. She simply said, stop the tape, I'll tell you another story. And that's so Pat.
That is. And this one was a really special episode for us because Pat was the minister who officiated our wedding. I think we were her very first wedding that she officiated, and she has always been super special to us, and we've always felt really privileged to have had her perform our wedding ceremony.
All right. So we thank you so much for listening, and until next week.
Bye.
Today is why I stay.